Chapter 36, Left Behind. We're trapped. How many are there? Rudo asked. Given what they just learned, she was surprisingly calm. 20, Your Majesty, reported the Zora, who'd relayed the grim news. Many of our remaining soldiers are in no condition to fight them. That demon left us weakened. When the Zora's eyes lingered on him, Link looked away, unable to deny the guilt uncoiling in his stomach. How did they get past our scouts? Grop demanded of nobody in particular. Are you telling me they saw nothing? They used portals, sir. Fish guts! Grop's exclamation sounded like a curse. Caught like a fish in a net. Those words did little to ease Link's growing fear. We either take on the Gerudo or attack their patrols. Are there any more food stores left in the temple? One of the other Zora shook their head. I'm afraid not, sir. The food caches were destroyed, and what remained has spoiled. Can Rauru warn Sheik that we're in danger? Link asked Gerudo, growing desperate. He told me he hasn't heard from Sheik since she and Impa left for Kakariko, Rudo answered. As she did, Link recalled Dark Link's words, and his insides turned to ice. I guess it's too bad for you that I already have a plan to deal with those Shika. They won't be helping you anymore. Had it been speaking the truth after all? It's not unusual for Sheik to disappear for a while, Rudo continued, misinterpreting the dismay on Link's face. She disappeared for nearly a year once, and I only heard from her just before you came back. I have to find her, Link said quickly, his heart beginning to race. He had to make certain she and Impa were okay. He knew Sheik possessed a medallion that allowed her to communicate with Rauru. Had she lost it? That seemed unlikely. No matter how much Link tried to reassure himself, he feared the worst. We have to get back to the shrine first, said Grop. Concern yourself with our most immediate problem, Hylian, before you attempt to tackle the next. Until the lake recovers, we cannot rely on it for food. Therefore, we cannot remain here. Link didn't retort. Grop did have a point. He didn't want to leave Epona and Navi in immediate danger either. Rudo was silent for a moment, frowning. Then, she smiled faintly. I might have an idea. Your Majesty? Lutada asked. Then she added warily, why do I not like that look? Rudo held up the water medallion, rubbing its brilliant sapphire surface between her fingers. The water medallion is a vessel that holds the flow of water, does it not? It should, Lutada affirmed. But nobody has used it in some time. How is the medallion going to help us? Link asked. He had a creeping suspicion that he knew what Rudo was going to do. What he was less certain of, however, was how channeling water could help at all. Rudo's smile didn't fade as she said, by channeling water, I may be able to use the lake to our advantage. Link still didn't understand and stared at her blankly. Come, we can assemble on the island and discuss this further. Grop, lead the way. Without further ado, the Zora filed out of the chamber and away from the gory remains of their fallen brethren. Some of the Zora paused to murmur a quick prayer for the dead, but they did not linger long, knowing that time was short. Rudo, Link noticed, was the last to leave. Her eyes fell upon the dead Zora, her expression unreadable. Can we not bury them? Link asked quietly. Not right now, Rudo answered, but we will come back for them. With that, Rudo spoke a short prayer, barely more than a whisper, and they then left the water temple behind. The journey back through the cave and into the dark depths of Lake Hylia wasn't pleasant. The mask Link wore might have given him gills, but it didn't help him see in the dark, and the lake was pitch black, even though the Zora used luminescent crystals that held light to make their way through the cavern. The darkness seemed to press in on the light, smothering it. Link could barely see further than a few feet in front of him, and even that wasn't enough to stop him nearly swimming into one of the Zora or colliding painfully into the walls of the cave. Twice, he was nearly kicked in the face by the swimmer in front of him. It was a relief when they finally emerged into the cold night, an icy wind battering them to the bone as they clambered onto the rocky shore. Despite the cold, the breeze was somewhat refreshing, and the repugnant smell of stagnant water that once hung over the lake seemed less odorous. Clouds now banqueted the sky, and Link could just see a small sliver of moonlight peeking through a break in the clouds. How long were we in there? He wondered. The realization that they'd been inside the water temple for so long deepened his fears. If the moblins on the lake shore were part of a vanguard, ranging ahead of the main army, then the rest of their forces would not be far away. Navi, he whispered, anxiously peering towards the distant shore. I'm sure she will be fine, Rudo said, regarding him quietly. Link nodded, desperately hoping that she was right. What I would give for fish therapy about now, Rudo murmured, turning her eyes to the lake. Link suspected she had not meant to be overheard, and nor did it seem that the Zora had noticed. A what? He asked blankly. Rudo cocked her head at him. It's a Zora thing, she explained. You sit in a pool, and lots of little fish nibble at your scales. It's quite relaxing. Wait, relaxing? Link asked distractedly, his attention divided between her and the far bank. How was having a fish eat you relaxing? Rudo might have laughed at his question, but now she only smiled, the mirth never reaching her weary eyes. They don't eat you, they clean your scales. Rudo cast her eyes back across the lake, her expression pensive. After we survive this, perhaps I will introduce you to the idea. I've heard in some realms even people try it. People, it sounds rather silly to me. After we survive. Link could hear the unspoken fear in those words. Rudo didn't continue the conversation. She turned her eyes to the other Zora, and then back to him. Consternation and fear clear on her face. Well, the sooner we get this over and done with, the better for all of us. Rudo's expression quickly turned to a mask of calm as she once again looked out over the water. There, near the shrine, the faint yellow light of a campfire beckoned to them. It promised warmth and food, both of which Link desperately craved. It was a false comfort. If he tried to draw near their camp, the moblins would attack. Rudo, he asked, what was this plan of yours? I'm going to try washing the moblins into the lake, Rudo answered, raising her voice so that others could hear. They cannot swim very well, and will doubtless die when the water snatches them. Link remembered almost drowning in the Zora River, and the idea struck him as barbaric. For a moment, he just gaped at her, torn between horror and wonder. Just how much had she changed in the last 7 years? But then, he remembered her quiet prayer for the dead when they'd left the temple, and he realized just how much that had affected her. Not to mention everything else she'd experienced. Isn't there any other way? He asked. Although he understood why Rudo was angry, he didn't believe anyone deserved to die by drowning, not even a moblin. And what about Ganondorf? A small voice in his head seemed to say. Would he spare you as you would spare those moblins? Link dismissed the incessant thought. If there was any other way, I would take it, Rudo said, her icy calm appearing to crack. Link was sure she found the idea of drowning the moblins just as disturbing as he did. She, if anything, had more reason to despise them. Once, their smaller kin had nearly eaten her. If Link and Soraya had not arrived in time to save her, they would have succeeded. Do not forget, Hylian. Those beasts would kill us given a chance, said Grop. I know, Link said quietly. They are probably feasting upon our dead as we speak, Grop added, and there was no mistaking the sudden fury in his voice. There were angry murmurs and curses from the other Zora. Rudo looked sickened, but held herself well. Link, on the other hand, very nearly retched. Do we know why they haven't attacked the Zora in the village? Lutada asked, speaking above the angry Zora. Because they are not after us, said Grop. It isn't a Zora they want. Link didn't need to look to know that the Zora general was staring straight at him. They're after me, he thought. Was there ever going to be a time when he wasn't endangering the lives of everyone around him? Rudo, let me handle them, Link insisted, despite knowing how foolish the idea was. He didn't want to risk the lives of any more Zora. It's my fault so many of your people died when we arrived. You know that wouldn't work, Link. Strong though you may be, Rudo chided him. And besides, Ganondorf sent that demon, not you. No, that thing only came here because of me, Link said fiercely. We do not have time to discuss the blame, Hylian, Grop replied. A slight warning tone in his voice indicated that the discussion was over. Besides, attempting to take on an entire patrol by yourself would be utter stupidity. Link, if the Gerudo patrols find us here, or if Ganondorf manages to use a portal to bring them on top of us, you will be caught. Rudo's voice was grim. There was no playful mirth in it now. They were in trouble, and Rudo knew it. What happens once you've dealt with the Moblins? Link asked. It's simple, Rudo said. We swim ashore and use the shrine. If you go to the village, you should be able to meet up with Navi and retrieve your horse. Now do not distract me while I do this. She quickly directed the Zora into two groups. One to go ahead and scout the shore. When the Zora affirmed they were ready, Rudo turned to face the distant campfires clustered like fireflies upon the distant shore. Her face grave, Rudo stooped to her knees, her head bowed. She extended her arms out, water still dripping from the tiny fins that ran along their length. In the faint glow of the crystals, Rudo looked serene and beautiful as she took up a meditative pose. Her stature bore a striking resemblance to some of the statues inside the water temple. Link stared at the dark expanse of the lake, wondering what Rudo was doing. Then suddenly, the lake seemed to convulse as though some unseen force had struck the water, pushing it towards the far side of the lake. Distantly, he could hear the Moblins cry out, their guttural screams shattering the peaceful night. Their cries were cut short by a roar of water. The lake heaved, and an immense wave came crashing down on top of the surprised beasts with a tremendous crash. The fires went out in a hiss of steam, extinguished as the lake trembled and then went still. In the wake of Rudo's spell, a terrible and chilling silence hung over the lake shore. Goddesses, Link thought. That is a horrible way to die. Without hesitating, a company of Zora divided into the lake and swam towards the shrine. Rudo opened her eyes. Looking strained and tired, she got up, wavering on her feet. Her guards quickly offered their aid, but she brushed off their concern with a wave of her hand. I cannot be certain that was all of them, she said, breathing heavily and looking towards Grop. But I will have cleared any around the shrine, and I doubt any survivors will choose to linger. Grop, take Link and 10 of your guard. Go to the village, find the others, and meet me at the shrine. As the Zora began to spread out, only Link's eagerness to be as far away from the water temple as possible, and his desire to see Navi, kept him focused. He was still stunned by what Rudo had just done, and he hoped that it had worked. What would happen if Ganondorf found out that Rudo had just drowned an entire patrol? Are you coming, Hylian? Grop asked. Or are you attempting to make a target of yourself? Without a word, Link followed Grop into the water, placing the mask back on his face and diving into the cold, inky black waters. He followed the Zora, swimming as quickly as he could. Fortunately, Grop didn't take off at full speed, and Link was able to keep up. They made their way through the still waters without incident. No more giant creatures with dozens of tentacles awaited them, nor any demon with red eyes. Tired, Link dragged himself from the water, letting the mask drop from his face once again. He was standing by one of the burnt-out jetties. The Zora crowded around him, including Grop. There was a flurry of questions as the Zora guarding the village tried to find out what had happened. Link paid no attention to this, unable to understand Zoran. He focused on a solitary figure flying towards him, and his heart soared with relief the instant he saw her. Link, Navi exclaimed. You're all right. What happened there? Rudo, did you... Rudo's fine, Link told her, trying to stop the abrupt onslaught of questions. She's meeting us back at the shrine. What about you? Still sounding frantic and bobbing up and down in front of him. Did you stop? Dark Link's gone, Link said, sounding colder than he'd meant to. He's gone, and he's not coming back. Navi almost froze in mid-air as she stared at him, frowning. He could tell that she was worried, but he didn't want to talk about it. Are you sure you're okay? Navi asked. Yeah. Link lied, not really wanting to talk about his encounter with Dark Link. What happened before? I was with the other Zora, and then we heard the Moblin screaming. Then this will probably sound ridiculous, but it was like the lake attacked them. I've never seen anything like it. I can explain later, he told her, and left it at that. They were safe for now, and that was all that mattered. Did Rudo's attendants get the wounded back to the woods? Navi shook her head. Not yet. They were cut off before they could reach it. But the moment we realized the path was no longer blocked, the Zora began moving as quickly as they could. Even with some of the Zora already making their way towards the shrine, getting everyone back to the forest would be slower than Link would have liked. Well, there was nothing they could do about it now. Eager to be as far away from the lake as possible, Link made his way up the slope and along the road that threaded its way between the broken buildings of the ruined town. His heart felt heavy as he wandered through the rubble-strewn streets. Doors hung loosely on their hinges, many damaged where they'd been kicked in, and the wind moaned through the empty alleys. Weapons and tools lay discarded amidst the dust, and debris choked the streets, hiding the bones of the dead. Link arrived at a building that had once been a stable. It was still relatively intact with soot-covered stalls and the odd piece of discarded tack. It wasn't the most comforting place to set up camp, Link thought, not with the ruins reminding everyone of what had happened here. He could almost hear the angry spirits of the villagers demanding revenge for their deaths. Link wondered why Ganondorf had attacked this village. Had they tried to resist his rule? Was it destroyed as a warning to those who dared to take up arms against him? Link shivered, pushing his scattered thoughts aside. Epona was tied to a picket line, strung between two wooden stakes beside the stable. She nickered as he approached, apparently pleased to see him. He scratched her muzzle, and she nudged him before sniffing his hand in eager anticipation of an offering of food. Sorry, Epona, Link said apologetically. I'll give you something once we're back in the forest. She glared at him, and he sighed. Was he really expecting the horse to understand why he couldn't get her food just yet? Did you find the Sage of Water? Navi asked. Link nodded. I did. It was Ruto. Ruto? Navi asked, sounding incredulous. Ruto's the Sage of Water? I get the feeling Sheik is not going to like that, Link mused. Not after the way Ruto had viewed her as a woman of inferior rank. At least it wasn't Grop, Navi said. I'd be worried about Darunia turning him into fish paste if they got into an argument. Link almost laughed. Come on, we have to get out of here. He didn't want to wait until Grop or Ruto got annoyed. Soon, Link joined the Zora moving back towards the shrine. Navi had to hide in Link's pocket as they quietly approached the shrine. He walked between two guards while Grop ranged somewhere ahead, and other Zora helped carry their wounded comrades in stretchers. Link was 2/3 of the way back to the shrine, the pale light of dawn just creeping over the eastern horizon, when the impossible happened. There was a sound like the buzz of an angry bee, and then suddenly one of the guards made a horrible gurgling sound. Link spun. One of the guards beside him was down, an arrow protruding from his throat. Horror paralyzed him as blood spilled onto the Zora's armor, staining the blue scales a dark red. He didn't even notice one of the other guards curse, grab their bow, and dispose of the offending archer within moments of his comrade going down. Archers! One of the Zora screamed. There! Navi hissed. Behind the rocks! In that moment, the world exploded around them in a torrent of screams, yells, and horn blasts. No, this is not happening. The Zora were under attack again. "Link, get to the shrine!" The Zora on Link's left yelled as more Zoran soldiers moved to surround both him and the wounded. "Go with the others and get the queen to safety!" "Rudo!" Link's eyes darted toward the structure. It wasn't far away. The pale white marble just visible in the feeble light. He had only just awoken the Sage of Water, rescued her from his shadow, and now she was in danger. He could almost picture Ganondorf sneering at him, amused and triumphant. "Go, Link!" Navi shouted, snapping him out of his brief trance. He obeyed, finding the willpower to move his limbs. Forgetting all thoughts of stealth, he mounted Epona and spurred her into a frantic gallop. She answered without resistance, just as eager to flee as he was. As the sky lightened with the coming dawn, Link could just make out shadows moving beyond the ruined village. It was just as he'd feared. One of Ganondorf's patrols had found them. Link knew the sages could utilize the magic in the medallions to see Hyrule, even while stuck within the sacred realm. Why hadn't Rauru sent him, or Ruto a warning? Was he unable to see what was going on without Sheik or Impa to aid him? Link wanted to call out to the sages, but as he tried to draw on the power of the medallions he wore, nothing happened. Something was blocking his ability to channel magic. With a cold trickle of dread, he knew. Only a mage could do that. No, Ganondorf can't be here. Not now! Forcing his fear aside, Link surveyed the hills as Epona streaked swiftly towards the shrine. Monsters were cresting the hills that clung to the lakeshore, their numbers far greater than that of an ordinary patrol. They resembled a swarm of black ants marching towards the lake, a staggering swarm of death that was thundering swiftly towards him. Link clutched Epona's reins so tightly that if not for his gauntlets, the leather would have cut into his fingers. "We can still get out of here," he thought desperately. They just had to get to the shrine and hold it long enough for everyone to escape through the portal. Link was almost back at the shrine when the sight of familiar figures emerged from among the bubblins. Tall, brown-skinned, and garbed in clothes that would have blended into their desert homeland were the Gerudo. They were still far away, their crimson banners blowing in the chill breeze. There were two figures at the head of the army. Fire and ice streaked from their outstretched hands as they bore down on the few brave Zora that made the fatal mistake of challenging them. "Navi, there, on the hill, what are those things?" Link asked. "They look like they're riding brooms." He dismissed the notion that sorcerers rode brooms as nothing more than a silly tale concocted by a drunk minstrel. His eyes, however, told him a different story. Navi followed his gaze, her frown deepening. "Witches!" As Link watched in growing dismay, the two sorceresses cut down any resistance that came their way, their path bringing them closer and closer to the huddle of Zora. Rudo's people looked like they were trying to fight back against an oncoming wave, knowing that at any moment it would sweep them all to their doom. Without breaking stride, Epona quickly bore Link to the battered Zora. A ring of guards stood around Rudo, their spears and bows pointing outward towards the approaching army. It was as if they hoped a mere force of 63 Zora could hope to fend off an army of hundreds. Small chance of that. The Zora parted to let Link through. The circle closed as Epona's hooves drummed the earth and came to a stop meters in front of Ruto. "What took you so long?" Ruto demanded. "I've already sent the first few groups through the portal, but we do not have time to dawdle." As if to emphasize her point, there was a shout as some of the Bulblins came in range of the archers. The Gerudo and the two witches were hanging back, using the Bulblins as fodder. Bulblin after Bulblin, some upon their bestial boar-like steeds, were falling. "We do not have long, my queen. We must leave now," Lutada said, her expression getting grimmer by the second. "Anybody left will have to hide in the lake until the army passes." "I fear that will not be possible," Rudo said. "One of those witches is a water mage. If my suspicions are correct, and she is the one who froze Zora's domain, then the lake may become a tomb." "Even one as big as Lake Hylia?" Link asked, surprised by Rudo's words. Yes, she answered simply. What about the temple? Ganondorf can't curse it again. Not while I hold the medallion, Rudo told him. Come, we must get out of here. They made a break for the shrine, climbing the steps and hurrying inside, the Zora bearing the wounded now joining them. As they entered, Azora offered Rudo Sheik's harp and she took it, quickly moving to stand on the dais. The Gerudo had joined the fray now, mercilessly cutting down the Zora where they stood. The two witches watched from the edge of the fighting, and Link wondered why they were holding back. Soon, the soft enchanting notes of the minute of the forest floated through the shrine as Rudo plucked the harp's strings, but Link could barely hear over the battle's din. He grabbed his bow and joined the archers who gave little notice of him as they too fired arrow after arrow. Rudo stepped off the dais when the flames erupted along its rim, and a group of 10 Zora vanished without a flash. Link kept shooting arrows towards the Boblins, a sense of dismay rising in him as his supply of arrows quickly dwindled. A group of Zora ran to the front of the shrine, raising their shields and leveling spears to provide some protection as the Zora continued their slow retreat. The second group fled, followed by the third. I'm running out of arrows here, Link thought, letting another shaft fly. He would have no choice but to run when that happened. There was no way the Master Sword would be of any use against an entire army. Link shot his final arrow just as the Boblins reached the steps. The Gerudo were charging forward now, still heedless of the Hylians standing amidst the Zora. Fall back, Grop shouted. Back into the shrine. His next words for Link. Go with them, Link. Ruto will have my head if I let them harm you. Link opened his mouth to voice a protest. Go! Grop bellowed. Hastily, all but a few of the remaining Zora broke into a retreat. A boar slammed into the row of shields the Zora had formed, breaking the last line of defenders. Link sprang towards the dais as the rider and beast were slain amidst a flurry of spears, tridents, and jagged blades. The last of the Zora ascended the steps, most of them outpacing Link, whose side was flaring with pain as his muscles and skin tugged against the stitches keeping his insides together. He sprang towards the dais along with the Zora, but just as he came within mere feet of the steps that would lead to safety, a scream caught his attention. One of the Zora was falling as a Gerudo withdrew a bloody scimitar from his chest. A second fell, an arrow shaft protruding from his shoulder. It was Grop. Link took a look back at the dais and then glanced at Grop, torn between leaving the injured Zora and running. He could hear Rudo playing the last notes of the minute of the forest. How she maintained her composure and kept playing, Link did not know. The Gerudo were meters away. Link could still save Grop, but doing so would be risky. Link knew he should leave Grop, but something stayed his feet, and he found himself sprinting down the steps, where he grabbed Grop under the arm. His side flared with pain, and he clenched his teeth, groaning. Grop looked at him in surprise. What are you doing, Hylian? I told you to flee! I don't leave people behind, Link grunted, as another Zora rushed to help him, pulling Grop onto the platform. As Link made it to the portal, a scimitar fell towards his chest in a blur. He fell to the side, the blade skimming through the air. There was a loud clink as Lutara fired her hookshot, leaving a gaping wound in the chest of the Gerudo who'd attacked Link. The harpoon withdrew with a horrible, wet, tearing sound. Link! Navi screamed. Move! A shimmer of motion alerted Link to a second Gerudo, just as they thrust a spear towards him. He swung his shield down, blocking the jarring blow that sent him stumbling into the wall. Rudo took several strides towards Link, but Lutara stopped her and took aim at Link's attacker. The hookshot, however, never fired. One witch had entered the shrine, a stream of fire billowing from her outstretched hand. The Zora dodged the curling tongues of fire as they slammed into the stone and seared the Heron carving. Mere feet away from the blast, Epona was spooked and bolted off the platform, just as blue fire leaped up along its rim. Link shouted a wordless cry as he struggled upright and dashed towards the portal. "Link!" Rudo yelled as Navi flew over the flames. Link didn't notice the witch send a blast of fire at him. Mere feet from the platform, Lutara reached out a hand to grab him, her fingers almost touching his. Link crashed in a painful heap. Confused and dazed, he looked up, expecting to see Rudo, Lutara, and the other Zora. His eyes sought the sight of the sacred meadow, but he only saw cold white marble. He had not made it in time. Rudo and the others were gone. "No!" Navi was still beside him. Epona was neighing, her eyes rolling in fright as a third Gerudo attempted to settle her down.
Well, what do we have here?
The witch asked, an unpleasant smiling twisting her haggard face.
A Hylian and a fairy. What an odd sight.
She took one glance at the sword at the Gerudo's feet. There was a peculiar expression on her face as she beheld the glowing gem in its hilt.
What's this?
The witch asked nobody in particular as her white-haired companion flew into the shrine. The red-haired witch flew onto the portal, looking at the sword.
Looks like we found ourselves quite a trophy, sis,
said the other witch, her bulging eyes examining Link closely.
If it isn't the pesky hero of time, we should brainwash him.
No, Navi shouted.
Nobody asked for your opinion, you annoying sprite.
The red-haired snapped, shooting a blast of fire towards her. Leave her alone, Link shouted. In his haste to spring to Navi's aid, he was heedless of the woman standing beside him until she slammed the shaft of her spear into his wounded side, ripping the stitches. Link fell to his knees, breathing through the intense agony.
We should punish him, Kotake, said the red-haired witch. I have just the plan.
She smiled. It was a predatory grin that chilled Link to the bone. He did not want to know what she had planned. It seemed the Gerudo didn't want to know either, for they were gazing at each other with thinly veiled disgust. The gem on the witch's forehead began to glow. A strange warmth flooded Link like the scalding heat of a fever. His skin flushed red, and in seconds, he broke out in a sweat and suddenly found himself gasping for air. What? He tried to focus on getting to his feet so he could get his sword. What are you doing? But then he could speak no more. It was as though lava was flowing through his veins, and they burned with a pain that blinded him. He screamed as the fire grew more intense and his heart raced faster. Somewhere, Navi screamed, "No! Stop! You're killing him! Please! Stop! Stop it!" The pain was relentless. Link coughed, sending a spray of blood onto the floor. He twisted and writhed in a paroxysm of agony. The witches chuckled, thoroughly enjoying the spectacle. Navi's screams were becoming delirious. "Stop! Please! Don't!" The other witch slapped her, sending her flying into the wall. Link did not notice, hot blood streaming from his nose as the fire inside of him grew with intensity. It was as though the witch was trying to literally boil his blood. A pressure was building against Link's eyes and head. He could not scream any longer, reduced to a spasm of coughs that brought up blood each time. His lungs struggled to take in air. Then they couldn't. The silence was worse. His eyes watered, and the muscles in his throat felt torn as he convulsed. It reminded him of nearly drowning in the Zora River. Courage burned inside him, its essence trying in vain to counter the spell. Darkness lingered on the edge of his vision as a single Gerudo, garbed in white, entered the shrine. Her mouth opened in shock, and she rounded on the witch. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "You're supposed to take him alive." Link collapsed, trembling in a bloody heap and weaker than a newborn babe. One hand was clutched to his throat, his lungs searing in pain as he coughed again and brought up more blood. The woman ran forward and crouched beside him. He felt the warm touch of her fingers, and she cursed.
"You're no fun at all," Kome complained. "You said alive," the other witch sniffed. "But nobody said in how many pieces that was supposed to be."
"He's choking," this from another Gerudo. "He won't last much longer without help." The Gerudo examining Link cursed and then turned to one of her companions. "Get him to a healer, quickly." "We sent for a healer before you arrived, but I fear it won't be enough." "Then find more! Now!" Link clung to the final vestiges of consciousness, stubbornly refusing to let go. The spasms in his lungs had stopped, and his body began to resign itself to fate. Without meaning to draw its power and too weak to stop it, he could sense courage trying to mend the damage, to heal him, but it was too much. Link's last thoughts were of Navi. "Are you okay?" Then everything went dark, and the hero of time knew no more. Still weak from the witch's magic, and from his healing, Link stirred. It took some time to get his bearings. The one thing he'd never understood about healing magic was how it sometimes drew on his own strength, accelerating the natural healing process at the cost of his body's reserves. At other times, it drew on the strength of a healer, weakening them instead. However, his body had been mended. He felt utterly spent, and his head was pounding relentlessly. Every part of him ached, but he was certain the majority of the damage done to him was healed. After a few moments, he dared to open his eyes to find himself blinking in the gloomy confines of a tent. His back was against something cold and hard. Except for his clothing, he was stripped bare. The belt of sages was gone. Without it, neither Soraya nor the others could not talk to him. That revelation jolted him. "I'm alone." He tried to move, only to discover his wrists were tied to a pole, the bindings cutting into his skin. Somewhere, beside him, somebody else stirred. "Link?" That voice, both concerned and familiar, belonged to a woman, the one person he'd been counting on to rescue him, unless he could somehow manage it himself. "No." He closed his eyes. "This can't be happening. Link, can you hear me?" The voice didn't go away. Link's heart sank as he opened his eyes and turned to behold the person sharing his prison. Sheik.